the people, by the people. For the culture.
Peace, Jumbo. Welcome to the Vital Hoops podcast, right here on Black Power Media Reloaded. My name is Fernando Cardenas, aka International XB. I am your host, and this is episode number 68. Our show today is going to be centered around Haiti and the revolution. And for that, we have a great guest. Our guest is an educator, an activist, and an artist. She has been an educator for over 10 years, teaching middle school and high special ed and gen ed social studies. She's the founder of Élément for Liberation, an African-centered education company that provides resources to parents and teachers to help them teach African children about their history. Our guest currently works to help free political prisoners as a member of the Northeast Political Prisoner Coalition, and she is a member of the Enslaved African Memorial Committee. As an artist, she writes poetry and creates digital artwork. In addition to all of her work, she is a doctoral student at Teachers College, Columbia University, studying curriculum and teaching. I'm honored to have her on the show. Our guest today is my comrade, Natacha Robert, aka Natacha X. Natacha, welcome to the Vital Hoops podcast. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm hyped today. No doubt. I'm hyped. I got my comrade from the Rise Up in the National Morning Show in here. So that's good. Welcome. It's good to have you. I appreciate you taking the time. I wanted to have you on. I've been wanting to have you on for a little while. You and Dr. Ikemba. You know what I mean? Shout out to the Rise Up Morning Show, Shout out to all of our hosts. I had Kalanji on not too long ago, with episode 63. Yeah, we spoke about Black August. I've had Buna on. We did 2 episodes on the link between South Africa and Palestine, Yeah, that was real dope. Episode 58 and 59. We spoke about how apartheid, how Israel was involved in apartheid and all of that. And then I had Comrade Isaac on episode 51. We spoke about sports, capitalism, and white hegemony.
Wow.
So yeah. So it's good to have you on here for episode 68. And we're gonna get into Haiti, you know what I mean? As a Pan-Africanist, we always say that, Pan-Africanism started in Haiti, with the Haitian Revolution. It's the first place where we truly freed ourselves and was like, yo, any African that comes here is free, is liberated. You know what I'm saying? All Africans are liberated here. So, and I want to say myself, as an Afro-Cuban, Haiti also has a special place for me because, in the south of Cuba, in the south or east of Cuba, when the ground shakes in Haiti, we feel it down there too. It's that close. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And I've always felt like, these 3 islands, Haiti, Jamaica, and Cuba, they have a triangle going on there that's really important because it's the African diaspora that speaks French, the African diaspora that speaks Spanish, and the African diaspora that speaks English. You know what I mean? And sometimes we feel divided because of these colonial languages, but we really want people. So I feel like that's a key connection right there. You were actually born in Haiti, and so I want to get into a little bit into the history, like I said, the history of Haiti and the Haitian Revolution. So I'm gonna let you take over for a little while, but before I do that, I want to ask you about Haiti, your connection with Haiti, and what Haiti means to you before you get into revolution.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. For me, I was born in Haiti, and even the terminology of calling it Haiti, calling it Haiti, calling us Haitian, um, which is something that I think that people are still working through in terms of the language and the use of Haiti. There's a lot of people that I know in particular, who are really working toward getting people to use IET as opposed to Haiti because of the connotation of the hate that the Haiti, the hate that they're connecting back to the French language. And
I
they
got
do a
you.
lot of stuff about trying to break it down and saying why you should use IET and not use Haiti, because IET and Haiti, those two, they have two different sounds and connotations even
Yeah.
behind them. And so even for me, as someone born in Haiti and in IET, that's been because you get so trained into using Haiti that I'm working on shifting and using IET all the time. But because it's my place of birth, because that's where my mother, my her all of her siblings, my father, all of his siblings, um I come from a large family on both sides. And so just and that's where they grew up all their lives. Like my mom was Haitian through and through, and so was my
Mm.
father. And I got to spend time there, being born there. I ended up coming to the US when I was young, but I got to spend time there, still have a lot of memories there. It holds a really, really deep, special place in my heart for me,
Mm.
because of the fact that that's where my family lineage and heritage lies. That's where my ancestral through line from Africa. And so and those in the way in which Africa shows up in Haitian culture and a lot of the things that we do. So it means a lot to me, and especially thinking about and the responsibility that I feel to
Mhm.
IET, to the people, as African people. I feel a sense of duty and responsibility to Haitian people and
Mm.
all Africans across the diaspora. So, and that same responsibility that I feel
Mhm.
makes me understand and that I need to do work for IET. Like I need to do work for the next generation. Like I need to really be invested and involved in the betterment of it, especially when we think about what's happened over the last couple of decades. I mean, obviously what's happened since the revolution, but what's happened
Mm.
over especially over the last couple of decades, when we're thinking about the earthquakes, the
Yes.
uh, the cholera outbreaks, and just the destabilization. There's and all of those things, the dictators, the installed dictators. So all of those things have led to what people call a brain drain in a different sense. And so we have to make sure that we're going back, like we're going back with whatever we came and what we were able to get, whatever tools and access and resources that we were able to get, and go back and help be part of the fight, to really finish what was started.
Yeah, without a doubt. Without a doubt. I appreciate that. And like I said, I always say, and we always say in my organization, we're pretty much all aligned with in this thought that, we all need to be focused on IET. We all need to be connected and up on what's going on over there always because of, the roots and what it represents. You know what I'm saying? But yeah,
Yeah, I
let's.
just want to add one other thing. I think that when we think about places like Haiti or Jamaica or Cuba or countries in Africa, we have to think beyond going to just vacation there or something. You know what I'm saying? Like we
Definitely.
have to say, okay, when I go back, I'm going to go back in a real substantive way to help,
Hmm.
to do something, to add to.
Absolutely, 100%. And it's not always easy, but it is what you said. It's necessary. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
absolutely. All right, if we can, like I said, let's get a little bit into the history of, Haiti and the Haitian Revolution, if you can start us off.
Yeah. So I think one of the key things too is because I feel like I've also seen it a lot in currently. I think I've seen some articles where they're still calling the island Saint Domingue, which was what it was called under the French colonial rule. So
Yeah. When it was with the Dominican Republic and Haiti, and it was, the French colonial rule. Absolutely.
yeah, and they called it Saint-Domingue, but the actual island itself is called Haiti and was also called Quisqueya, which I believe in the Dominican national anthem that they use Quisqueya, and
Okay.
we use Haiti, and so that was the term that restoring the name, and so understanding that this island had. So even going, I guess, starting thinking about the revolution, but thinking about it in terms of going back to the story of the island itself, right? I think sometimes to just start with thinking about it as Saint-Domingue is a disservice, right, to those indigenous people that were there and were massacred under the French colonization of the island. And so, yeah, so you had the island of Haiti or Quisqueya, where you had the Arawak people that were living there prior to it being colonized. And just like we know within the US and within, other parts of the Americas and everywhere else, when colonization happened, you have the abuse to the point of, and the abuse and the genocide, and the working to death of the indigenous people, which then leads them to say, okay, well, we need more people to do this labor, so we're gonna start bringing in people from Africa and enslaving them and also working them to death. So that's the other thing that I think is important to know about what was going on in Haiti even prior to the revolution starting, where you have over 50% of the population by the time the revolution happens are directly from the African continent, because they were working them to death. So like literally it was cheaper to bring in new Africans than to make sure that those that were working, were able to sustain themselves, just living, just to be alive. And so that was also part of the reason why you had so many Haitian people being directly from the African continent by the time the revolution happens. Also,
That's crazy. That's crazy what you just said right there. Like I think we need to think about that one. Like, the way our people were treated, our ancestors, like, we're gonna run through this one real quick. He'll probably give us a few years, I don't know. And then whenever he's done, like we'll bring in the next, instead of taking care of this one, let him die, It's wild. It's wild. But
yeah,
yeah, I'm
it's
sorry to
like
cut you off.
no, it's fine. It's like you're saying, no, I think that the brutality of enslavement, that we don't really, like you were saying, like sit and think about
Yeah.
what that really means, because just to know that you're working, that the average, and I want to I'm gonna try to remember the like the average lifespan of someone who was enslaved in Haiti, because it's like a car. People treat their cars, better. They try to get, wear out of their cars for 10, 20 years if they can, right? They'll restore it, they'll do all the things. And
Yeah.
that's a car. But so, the just to think about the dehumanizing and devaluing of African people as human beings is astronomical. And I think, like you said, if we sit with it more, we would realize, the brutality of it. And I think some of the ways that people make light of enslavement, think you could make jokes about it, think you could laugh about it, think you could play about it, then think you could reimagine some weird, crazy nonsense, about some of these lies about, African people. Well, what is the word? I forgot what Kanye West said, whatever. But like,
Kanye West? Oh man.
that you just, you just
He's
decided, yeah, it's not that bad, that you're just
Yeah, he
gonna
said so
do
much
anything.
wild shit.
So yeah, so I know, I think your point is very, very, very important. Yeah. And so with that came, so because you had so many African people
Oh,
direct.
sorry to cut you off. He said
No, no,
it's the choice. He said slavery was a
oh
choice.
yeah. Yeah,
That's what
exactly.
he said.
That's
Yeah,
what he said. Exactly, that it was a choice.
yeah.
And so I think continuing with that, you had a lot of maroonage that happened within Haiti. So there's a large portion of the Haitian people who were living in the mountains, you know, as maroons in maroon societies, creating a laku system that was based on African, you know, principles and ideas of community, spirituality, you know, African cosmological understandings, extended family. So you had that whole independent system and sovereignty within those maroon communities that existed too. And then you also have the creation of Haitian Creole, the language of Haitian Creole, that also comes about during these times over a period of time as you're having, you know, Africans coming in, having to learn some of the language that's going on within the country, where you have the French being spoken, but then you also have, because you're having different groups of people. So just like when we think about enslavement within any other place, like you're having those who are working on, you know, enslaved who are working on the fields, the enslaved who are working in the houses, the free mulattoes and blacks, and then so you're having different levels of French language, and then also you're having the language of Africans that are coming in, and they're, you know, working with each other and dealing with each other. And then eventually, you know, I'm not going to go into the whole creation, you know, the whole creation process of Haitian Creole, but you have then the creation of the language of Haitian Creole that then is used amongst African people, and then becomes the language that we use. Even there's a quote by Jean-Jacques Dessalines where someone, I think it was during the revolution, you know, someone addresses, you know, speaks to him in French, and he's just like, why are you speaking to me in French? We have our own language, you know? And so just seeing, you know, how important that language also was to the revolution, and how that was a form of resistance, you know, we're thinking about how we start to lead up to the point where we're having the actual physical breakout of the revolution in August 21st or 22nd of 1791. But as I like to say, the Haitian Revolution started with Bois-Caïman, when Bois-Caïman, you know, and the voodoo ceremony started happening, when we're thinking about Boukman. And so I think it's important for us to kind of think about all of these parts that lead into what we then see, you know, break out in 1791, because in our time where we need to know what are the moving pieces, what are the things that we have to do, what are all the moving pieces to like, you know, for really putting forth a resistance. And so that there's multiple pieces. You have to think about all the things that you don't see, all the things that are going on, that are building up in different ways to be able to prepare you for the, you know, initial physical battle and clash in that kind of way. Yeah. And
Can I cut you off real quick?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
There's a couple things I wanted to say. First, what you talk about when you speak about, you know, maroonage and all of that is very similar to what was going on pretty much all over the Caribbean, right? When we talk about Jamaica, definitely, you know, and how they developed their own patois as well. And, you know, in Cuba, there was a lot of maroonage as well. But for some reason, I don't know why, we didn't really develop a language like that in Cuba. You know what I'm saying? Like to this day, we speak Spanish. I mean, our accent is very different. Like the way we speak Spanish in Cuba is like it has a strong, and it is mixed with certain Yoruba words and things like that, right? But it's still Spanish, right? And the accent is just different. But I know the way Jamaica developed their language, Haiti as well, it's really dope. But I also wanted to say, you know, I don't know if you were gonna go back to Bookman, but you know, I just wanted to ask you about, you know, spiritually, right? Because Bookman had like the ceremony, right, and everything that was going on, that was kind of like what you said, like the beginning, right, of the revolution. Can you get into that a little bit with Bookman?
Yeah, we can talk a little about it, a
Yeah,
little bit about it.
a
Yeah,
little
so
bit.
Boukman, like you were saying, that's the spiritual, when we think about the spiritual aspect of the Haitian Revolution. We know that he was from the Senegambia region, and that he ended up he was enslaved in the Caribbean, particularly in Jamaica, before he came over to Haiti. And we know that also he was labeled as like a troubled slave,
meaning he was a rebel.
Yeah, exactly, a rebel, someone who was causing too much problems. But then you have him being transferred over to what was then called Saint-Domingue, where he became a Haitian or an Haitian voodoo hogan, like a priest. And then we know that he attempted to get a lot of the enslaved people together to kind of have them really start to think about themselves more in particular, and think about what was going on more in particularly in terms of the spiritual sense of what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have Boukman that happens, where he and which happens about like the August 14th. And so him and Cécile Fatiman preside over like a series of meetings to organize the revolt. A lot of work in particular, around the spiritual aspect when we're thinking about those, like that Boukman, which was a spiritual ceremony,
mm-hmm.
not in particular, like, when we're thinking about when the actual battle starts to happen.
Right.
And one of the things that Boukman says during that is he talks about how there's a quote that he says, let me see if I can pull up the quote. Okay, here it is. He says that this God who made the sun, who brings us light from above, who raises the sea, and who makes the storm rumble, that God is there. Do you understand? Hiding in a cloud, he watches us. He sees all that the whites do. The God of the whites punishes them to crime, but he wants us to do good deeds. But the God who is so good orders us to vengeance. He will direct our hands and give us help. Throw away the image of the God of the whites, who thirsts for our tears. Listen to the liberty that speaks in all of our hearts. And so, just thinking about spiritually, what does that mean when he's talking about thinking about our God, right? Not the God of the whites. That it's a particularly clear that there's a way, a cosmology that we have as African people that we need to lean into, that sanctions what we do here, right? That sanctions that we need to take vengeance against what these whites are doing, and what their God, is saying is okay, but that we have our own God that sanctions that we should be able to defend ourselves, to resist, and to have vengeance against these enslavers who only do harm to us. And again, and I think that's also why it's important to remember the makeup of Haiti by the time the revolution happens too, right? Mm-hmm. That you're having like such a large population of Africans coming directly from the continent, because of the way that they're just brutally killing and working us to death. And that's it.
For sure. Boukman is definitely, Dutty Boukman is definitely a important figure, that we don't study enough.
Yeah.
So yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah. And so we talked a little bit about Boukman. We talked a little bit about, the Haitian, it starts. We also know that it's starting, which becomes an important point for thinking about the rest of how Haiti, when we're talking about, Pan-Africanism, how it becomes connected to so much of the rest of the world that, that is under colonialism and enslavement. That around the time you have the French Revolution happening, you have Napoleon, and you have Haiti being such a, what do they call it? Like the crown jewel of France. Like it was making so much money.
Yeah.
France.
Make money, make.
Exactly. Yeah. And so you have then the revolution breaking out in 1791, where you're having the French Revolution starting in 1789. So you see that those years making a difference, because the revolution's happening while you're also having instability within France because of their revolution. And you're having also Toussaint L'ouverture, who is also privy to a lot of you know, what's happening in France, but also that we know this information is not just being known in IET, it's also being known in the Americas. Like, and I think that's also like something we forget about, that we're knowing what the international landscape is looking like when, you know, these revolutions happen. But even before then, we're already planning anyway, even before the even before the French Revolution actually breaks out. So then you have, you know, the Haitian Revolution happening while you have the French Revolution going on as well. And through that time, when we have Toussaint L'ouverture, who starts off the revolution having been a son of an enslaved woman, but also having been able to learn how to read and do, and you know, then he gets trained. And I would have to go back and look into my sources in my writing for the name of the woman, but who trained him, right, in combat and, you know, becoming, you know, a soldier. So then he eventually becomes you know, one of the main people who are leading the Haitian Revolution. Then you have the Haitian Revolution. It starts, it's going on. I guess I'm not going to get into like battles or anything.
The battles, yeah. That's fine.
But so then, because I guess I'm giving like a general overview to get to the end of it, because it is actually a kind of a long story now that we're talking about it. Yeah. And also the thing too, one of the other things to remember is that when the Haitian Revolution begins, you have a bunch of different groups. So you have the enslaved Africans, you have the marooned Africans, you have the whites who, like, if you think about like South America, where you have that pyramid, and then you have mestizos, and you know, all of these different, and at the top, when you think about peninsulares, are the ones who are the whites born in the colony, but they don't have the same kind of prestige as the whites that are born on the colonial land, the colonial mother country land or whatever. And how
so the whites born in like Europe, they have more prestige, right?
Yeah, than the ones who are born in the colonies. And also, but you also have that as a tension too, of them wanting to break away so that they can actually have the same kind of power that those. It's kind of like when we think about the American Revolution, right? You think about, you know, they wanted to break away from England because they wanted, you know, and come over here and do their own colony. They wanted to be you have the same status as those in England they felt were, you know, the ones who had all the power, and vice versa and all that other stuff too. And then so you have the free blacks. So you have those whites, and then you have also the mulattoes and the free blacks, who also, I guess, were like, I would describe as being in this in-between place, where it's like, yeah, you have access to a certain extent to like the white establishment of colonial order, but then also you're not completely white, but then also you have a little status, and you've bought into the colonial mentality, the French Euro-Christian view. And so you want to have that kind of status too, but then also you don't want to have the, you know, the system in the way that it is. So you have a bunch of all of these groups at the same time that end up being part of the revolution when it's going on. And that becomes an issue when after the revolution's over, when we see the assassination of Dessalines. And so that's why I wanted to point that part out, because some of those things that were the interests of the different groups didn't necessarily settle,
right, even
after, you know. So then and that left a space open for, you know, where even though we know after the IET wins the revolution, that you have the French try on two different occasions to recolonize the island, right, and reestablish in slavery.
Absolutely, yeah. With Napoleon's army tried to come through, and it was known as one of the strongest and biggest armies in the world, right? And you know, Haiti did what they had to do.
Exactly, and they beat them, and
right.
You know, a lot of the times, like especially before we had the kind of research that we have now, you know, where we're telling our stories and we're actually showing it, they were, you know, they would try to pretend, you know, in the history books, you know, all of
Yes.
these white writers would try to pretend like, oh yeah, well, you know, the reason that they won is because they, you know, they did voodoo and they weren't, you know, they weren't really good. It just so happens, and really what, you know, and it was, you know, just again to the continued dehumanization, and you know, white people, they could never actually show themselves to be who they actually are. They always have to put on the pretense, right? They always
Yeah.
have to put the lies out there to continue the myth of their superiority.
No doubt.
But also, so going back to, okay, Toussaint, you know, they begin the revolution, but you're not just having Toussaint, you have Cécile, Fatima, like we said, that was part of the beginning of the Haitian Revolution. You have people like a lot of women like Aunt Toya, that they were, you know, Toya, that they would call her, who was also a warrior. You have Sante Blair, who was also a lieutenant. So you have a mix of, it's not just men that are fighting at the beginning and all the way through. You have a lot of women that are fighting, that are lieutenants, that are warriors, that are in there. And you know, some of them, they're coming with direct lineage from the Dahomey kingdom.
Yes.
And so, you know, you have them training. You have Marie Jean, who was a sharpshooter and a spy. So you have and also, you don't even just have the men and the women, you also have the children that are also participating in the Haitian Revolution. Baina Bello, I remember recently, she talked about how they would send children out, and they would, because they were small and you couldn't see them, they would like send them out to, I think it was like, get the lay of the land per se, of seeing,
To check out the territory and
yeah,
everything.
and
Yeah, okay, okay.
right, yeah, and so that they, you know, gets, and you wouldn't be able to, you know, like they wouldn't know because they're children. And then, you know, she was even telling stories of how you had women warriors who had these dresses with huge pockets to have their babies with them when they were going into battle.
Wow.
It reminds me of also I think it was King Menelik and his queen that went into battle together. So you have the same thing, you know, that
Yeah.
had that same thing happening in IET. And, you know, one of the other things that I think is really that has always stuck with me, that I learned about the Haitian Revolution from Baina Bello, was when she was talking about how they had to stuff the cannons, and you know, when they're going to make sure that, you know, the cannon, that you have something to block the cannon from actually being able to shoot out, because it would kill thousands of people, just like, you know, the one cannon blow. And that sometimes, if they had nothing else to put to stop the cannon, to stuff the cannon with, that they would stuff, you know, even a baby in the hole of the cannon. Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, it's just, I feel like the depth and details of all of the things that were employed within the Haitian Revolution is something to really, really, really be studied.
Yeah,
Because,
yeah, without a doubt.
you know, I feel like I'm always learning something, and I'm always finding out more and amazing details. Um, they use a lot of herbal medicine too, in
Yeah.
terms of helping to treat wounds, take care of those who were wounded, and
Mm-hmm.
make sure people were being taken care of and ready, you know, if they had to go back or if they couldn't go back. And so there's so much. So those are just some of the things I'm thinking about in terms of
Yeah.
you know, what was happening as the actual fighting was going on. And then we know that at one point in the revolution, there's kind of an agreement made between Toussaint and Napoleon, that, okay, fine, we're going to give you freedom, but it was kind of like a contingent freedom where you still had to be connected to France. So then you have that as part of the reason why they talk about, you know, when they kidnap Toussaint and bring him over to France,
Mm-hmm.
they're also kind of using that kind of initial agreement that they were putting forth um to, as a reason why they, you know, that they're having him come over there, where actually they kidnap him and they bring him over to France, where they imprison him. And you have Dessalines, who then continues the Haitian Revolution, because, you know, he ends up dying in France. And
Toussaint,
and so then
and so
after
Dessalines, takes over till
so then Dessalines takes over, and he finishes out the revolution, and he makes sure that when the revolution is complete, Haiti is a completely sovereign, independent nation with no allegiance or ties to France, and creates the constitution for Haiti. And he becomes the emperor, and he talks about blackness in a sense, but like how everybody on the island is black, and that it stands for freedom. And so that's also where you see some of these ideas around Latinidad come out of. And but that's a whole nother that's a whole nother what's the word I'm looking for, show. That's a whole nother show, because what it means to be for justice and liberation of African people all over, right? And that was also one of the things that he put out as the emperor of Haiti after creating that creating that constitution in 1805. And so when you have Haiti becoming the independent republic that it is in 1804, on January 1st, 1804, when the revolution ends. And but he also did say at the end, when the revolution ends, that we're not done, that even though we've won, the fight isn't over, because even though the French might not be here in body, that they are still here in our minds and in the the practices, some of the practices that we still have work to do to fully get the French out of Haiti.
Decolonize.
So he was clear that even though they had won the revolution, that the fight to really expel the French was not done, because you have to do it in the spiritual, metaphysical, and all of the other senses. Because what we know about colonization and enslavement is that what they do is they take away your own ways of being, and they try to replace it with their own. And so you have to make sure you do the work to undo all of those things.
And also there was the fact that, that was in Haiti, but then you had all the rest of the Americas around there. There was still slavery going on, right?
Yeah. And that was the other thing. So two things. So we know that when the revolution ends, that France then has to sell the Louisiana that they own. So when people think about the Louisiana Purchase, I think one of the things that they sell in their history books is like, it was the cheapest deal, or whatever the case may be. But because the French had lost and they needed money for all of the wars that they had going on in Europe, along with, rebuilding from the revolution, the French Revolution, that they needed the money. So they ended up selling it to the US, because they were in the position to really need money. And so when we're thinking about the way in which the Haitian Revolution really has such a resounding impact across the world, in every aspect, whether we think about, America and that, and how that, when America then buys that, how that, helps to further the growth of America and, its manifest destiny, ambitions, and its colonial ambitions. And then you have Haiti sending over masses of troops and military personnel into South America to help people like Simon Bolivar, but who would then turn around, but on the condition that you end enslavement within all of Latin America. But then you have some of those countries that turn around, and Simon Bolivar himself, and they don't end enslavement.
Right.
And they also, when Haiti becomes independent, we know that they are forced to pay what we call reparations to France.
Which is one of the craziest things in the history of America.
Because when you think about it, where in what place in history you see a country who loses is the one that gets the reparations? The loser of the war
They're saying you making us lose money now, so we need we need you
Right.
to pay us.
You making us lose money from owning people that you could never really own. Like, you as a person, I used to own you, now you have to pay me because now I
Right.
can't own you
Exactly.
and I can't work you to death anymore.
That's it.
And part of the way that they were able to force the payment of the reparations was through an embargo of trade that
Yeah.
happened after the revolution, where no country would trade, not
Right.
even those Latin American countries that IT sent military personnel, sent money to, not just military personnel, money, weapons, everything you needed, they supplied it. Strategy, all of it, to help them. And they also wouldn't trade with IET. And so you have that as part of the way in which that they were forced to pay the money. And even though they paid it, that still was, they still weren't, they still wouldn't leave IET alone after that. And the story continues. But
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like I went a lot of places.
No, that was great. I appreciate that. Are you familiar with the story of Carlota in Cuba?
I
Carlota
don't think
Lucumi?
no, I don't think I am.
So Carlota Lucumi was she was an enslaved African in Cuba of Yoruba descent. Most of our people in Cuba are Yoruba. I mean, not all of them, but a lot. And so she led one of the biggest rebellions in Cuba, and it was in 1843. So I'm just thinking, right? I'm just thinking like the revolution pretty much came to its quote unquote end in like 1805, and then here we are in 1843 in Cuba, still trying to, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Still still working. So anyway, but Carlota Lucumi, she was an amazing woman because she was able to really lead this this rebellion in one of the biggest plantations in Cuba, which was located in Matanzas, right? Which is actually the place where my father's from. You know, Matanzas is a region in Cuba that is north of the island, close to Havana, kind of close to the capital, but it's a little off. And it's like one of the most Afro-Cuban dense populations, you know, and that's where my father's from. But anyway, you know, Carlota Lucumi, she led this rebellion, and it inspired a few other plantations around the area. So it was really huge because it went from one plantation to the other, you know, and it was in 1843. It was called the Triunvirato plantation. And so yeah, I think obviously all these rebellions around the Caribbean were all greatly inspired by the revolution in Haiti, you know, without a doubt. And to this day, you know, all the movements, all of our movements today are still inspired by that. But after in Cuba, after we got our independence from the Spanish, there was another movement. There was the first Black political party of the Western Hemisphere, which was founded in 1908. And I actually wrote an article about that in the, you know, in the new
Afro-Pig.
Afro-Pig magazine. Yeah, without a doubt. So that was about that. But yeah, I just wanted to share that story about Carlota because I think it's key, you know, and it's also another one of these, you know, hidden stories that we don't really know about. You know, there's a bunch of those like that. There's a bunch like that. But
Yeah. That was the other thing too. So that's one of the things I was thinking about too when I was also making the point about the, America and the Louisiana Purchase. So not only did it do that in terms of America, but also um it inspired a lot of revolts within the United States. And when
mhm.
that happened too, not only did it inspire a lot of revolts within the United States created more restrictive laws in
Mm,
terms of what uh the enslaved could do because of what happened in Haiti.
yes.
And so, it's like, again, just the way in which that the revolution impacted the whole of the world,
Yes. Without a
um,
doubt.
throughout the world and everywhere, you
Yeah,
know.
for sure.
And that's one of the reasons why I think too, when Napoleon says that quote about, you know, him wanting to stop the march of blacks, he wanted to make sure that he doesn't just beat them just to beat them, but to stop the march of blacks worldwide. Because we see that the interconnectedness, like when we're talking about the Pan-Africanism, right? We see the interconnectedness of our movements when we look at the Haitian Revolution and the impact and the connection it had across the diaspora everywhere.
Without a doubt, yeah, for sure. And to this day, you know, you know, especially here in France, I know that they paint Napoleon, you know, as a hero, you know, as a good person. You know what I'm saying? So this is tough when we're talking about education, etc. You know, when you have children in school. You know, my son came home before talking about Napoleon. And
Oh, yeah.
yeah, I told that story before, but you know, we have to constantly. I know you're an educator, so you know we have to constantly be educating ourselves within our home and our community, because if we don't do it, then we. But yeah, let's get into Haiti and what's going on today. You know, let's kind of bring that together. We know that today the situation in Haiti, you know, is dire. We have the so-called gangs and everything that's going on with that, you know, and we recently our people in Haiti are dealing with this mass deportation, right, out of the Dominican Republic, which is crazy because once again, you know, it's the same island, you know, same island, same people, but somehow we're so colonized, you know, that we've managed to think that we're better than our own people at some point. But yeah, I know there's a lot to say, but can you kind of like, you know, briefly tie it up with today and what's going on today in Haiti and, you know, what we need to know as African people.
So, I mean, I think that, so a few of the things that we need to know when, as it pertains to Haiti today,
Mhm.
I think what happened specifically after the revolution, when we're just talking about the trade embargo
Mhm.
that happened to really isolate Haiti and make sure that it had a difficult time establishing itself as, you know, this new independent nation, is the same thing that continues today. Is that they've been trying since the end of the revolution
Mhm.
to make sure that Haiti cannot establish itself as a powerful, independent, sovereign nation. And so we know that we've seen today, in, like, you know, in today's time, and when I say today's time, I'm talking about all the 1900s to the 2000s, right? We've seen multiple occupations where you have the massacring and the killing and abuse of Haitian people in the hundreds of thousands. And you have multiple puppet governments being installed. You
Mhm.
have you have multiple assassinations that are backed by and supported by countries like France and the United States.
Yeah.
Um, and even when they're not outright assassinations or outright installments of dictators, you have
Mhm.
the undermining of the process of choosing someone to run the country,
Yes.
where um recently, I forgot when it was, but there was a good example, because I went to a talk recently with that Bella was giving. She was saying how there was um maybe the 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 four, I'm thinking back from today, so maybe like four election cycles back, where you had the United States announce the winner of the Haitian election before Haiti even knew. So that shows you in your face, right, how they are in control. Then you have the
Yeah.
ousting. We think so, you know, you have the installment of dictators like Papa Doc, but in, you know, the um his administration being allowed to continue and massacre people. But then
Mhm.
you have the ousting of Aristide,
I see. Yeah.
is elected, who is, you know, duly elected by the people, and who actually wants to make sure that Haitian people have the right education when we're thinking about in the language, especially, you know, Creole in part, you know, when we're thinking about the language and the education of the children within IT, and what does that mean? Because 90, I'm gonna say 90, but it might be a little higher. 90% of the population speaks Haitian Creole. But the official language in like governmental processes and is French.
It's French, yeah, that's great.
And that, you know, French is put on such a high pedestal as like a cold language when 90% are monolingual and they only speak Haitian Creole. And so, like, you know, things, so all of those things, like, so I feel like these are all of some of the moving pieces that are important to understand when we're thinking about why IT looks the way that it does today and what the struggle is to really have an education system that really is educating ICN people, to really have a political system that is really by ICN people and not by foreign supported oligarchs or you know, people are talking about gangs today. The people who those gangs are an outgrowth of the gangs, you know, the oligarch imperial colonialist gangs that exist within the country because of the destabilizing of the government within itself,
Right.
through the collusion of those who would see IT be in the state that it is now perpetually, so that they can go in and be able to get the resources. Just like when we think about Africa, there are a lot of resources in IT when we think about gold and when we think about and a lot of you know, these multinational companies also want to create factories in IT to be able to not just get the resources, but to refine them and to be able to produce them for the consumption of the West. And so that's the other part of it too. You have a lot of gold and minerals within IT, I believe, as well as oil. So that also too is important to understand, that when we're seeing what's happening in IT, it's not just because, oh, you know, they can't get it together, or, you know, there's always fighting. Oh, what a poor country. No, that there are the same forces that were at work, the same countries that had a stake in the defeat of IT and the prosperity of France are the same ones that have the same interest and are the same ones that are acting in the same way today, because they want to have it like it was before, be, you know, a country, you know, that really just makes money
For
off the
them.
back of you know, oppressing African people in order to support the economies of France
Yeah, no doubt.
and America.
And you know, the way, let me say this, the way colonialism works also, like you said, you know, there's also when you look at these islands that, for example, that are colonized by the French, right? When you look at Martinique and these islands, right? People are usually focused on the land part, right? But there's also the sea. We have to understand that there's a certain portion of the water around the island that goes with it, right? So it's not just always the land, there's also the sea, which is also then connected to certain military tactics, right? That have to do with the seas and all of that. And obviously there's also the fishing and all of that, which is also connected to the eco side that we're living, that we're going through and all of that. But yeah, it's interesting, you know, the way colonialism and neocolonialism works. And like you said, how these imperialist nations want to still control, you know, these islands. And there's a lot to that. But was there anything else you wanted to add on Haiti?
Yeah, I guess I would also add that there's a huge influx of NGOs that exist in IT that really affect the economic and social aspect of life in the country as well, where it's just like a place to siphon money out of. So when we think about the earthquake and you know, and the money that was raised and how somehow all the money got lost. Nobody knows where it went. All the money that was supposed to be used to rebuild for infrastructure to help IT under the control of Clinton and Bush, it, you know, for some reason it got lost. And also the trade imbalance, where there's been a deliberate trade imbalance created, where we have to import a lot of stuff that we used to never have to import, like rice. That was under the Clinton administration that made it so that we no longer grew our own rice, that we have to import it from America, and the rice is trash.
Right.
Yeah, so it's just some of those things too, I guess I would also say. And like, I think you make a great point about the waters. And I would also say that it's important to also think about how things are happening, I guess, in terms of the way we think about how we are told about Haiti. Like a lot of stuff, a lot of the time when we're getting news about Haiti, it's about the capital, Port-au-Prince.
Yes.
But a lot of Haiti is the countryside. Like for me, I come from the countryside. And we know that's where there's a lot of more practice of voodoo, a lot of African ways are still practiced within the countryside, which is the larger portion of Haiti as we know it too. So I think that's also something to think about as we think about today, and how we're told about Haiti, and where it's just really always so focused on the capital.
That's right. Yeah. I appreciate that. Cut off the heads, burn down the house. You know what I mean?
Koupe tet boule, yeah.
That's right. All right. So thank you for that. You're also an educator. So I wanna talk a little bit about what it is that you do. And I want you to tell us a little bit about Elimu for Liberation. Right? You're the
Oh
founder
yeah.
of Elimu for Liberation. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I used to be a social studies teacher,
Hmm.
and I've been through doing social studies teaching, I came to realize how Eurocentric the curriculum was. And it also made me think back. It's not like you go as an adult through teaching, like that's the only time it was Eurocentric. But that, seeing that as an adult, the person who had to teach the history, also made me reflect on my own schooling and how it was so Eurocentric as well. How like, oh yeah, when I think back to when I was going to school, this is the same thing I was learning. And yeah, I was thinking like, oh, where are the Black people? And I also remember when I finally learned about Toussaint, and that's really the only person that they ever teach you about. They don't teach you
Yeah.
about Boukman or Cécile, Fatiman, or Dessalines. They only teach you about Toussaint. And there's, like, I remember there being just a small paragraph. Like, I feel like all the other chapters, like, when there's talking about Latin, and then they get to Latin America and they talk about different countries in Latin America, and they talk about IT, and then it's like, okay, like
Little
and then that's it, like a small
little
paragraph.
paragraph.
And then, all right, let's move on. And so through that, my own experience as a student, and then also being like an educator, I decided like, okay, I need to do more. I really need to make sure that I'm giving Black students in particular the history that is going to empower them. And so through that, I was doing, like, when I was teaching, I was doing like my own work, and just getting it into the curriculum, incorporating it, making sure that they're getting this stuff. But then I was also finding that as a teacher, there wasn't a lot of other teachers that wanted to do that. They didn't have the passion or the care to,
Mm.
well, one, the schools that I used to work in, predominantly, they were predominantly white in terms of like the staff. But we know that the school system, the 80% of the educators are white women. And
Mm.
so that tells you what it looks like to be a teacher and who your colleagues will be,
Right.
especially also in history. It's very white men dominated. And so that also tells you about, like, well, then who's going to think that we need to really incorporate more of our African history into the curriculum and really make it tell the truth. Because
And
there's also,
African women especially.
yeah, exactly. And so how are you going to get this information into, like, they're not going to be thinking about getting this information into the curriculum or the importance of it
Yeah.
or even recognizing the lies and distortions that exist within the curriculum. And so I just found that like I needed to create, I didn't see it, so I needed to create it for myself. And so that's when I ended up creating Elemu for Liberation, which is Elemu is Swahili for education,
So
for liberation. And so what I do through that consulting company that I started is help teachers, parents, school districts figure out how to incorporate more of our history into the curriculum, teach in a more African-centered ways, because Elemu for Liberation is an African-centered company. So and we do everything from centering African people, you know, especially in when we think about Pan-Africanism, Afrocentricity, when we're thinking about us as the subjects of our stories, right? Not the objects, not the ones on the periphery, but the ones that are centered and our interests are centered, and it's a liberatory practice that we're doing. Our purpose is for liberation. Education is for liberation. It's not for us to just get it and make more money and do all that other stuff. Like, no, it's to help you know your purpose and see how your purpose is connected to the larger purpose of African people and the larger mission of liberation for African people. And so how do we do that? And so I work to help around curriculum, doing that, as well as helping teachers write curriculum or think about their curriculum or think through their curriculum, or if they're planning projects or units that are important, to make sure that they get the story right, make sure that they're not just teaching it as like, oh, this leader, that leader, but they're doing it in a way that is critical, that is also connected to the students and making them think critically as well. So that way they become more oriented toward continuing in our footsteps, right? To be involved, or they become more inclined to be involved in our struggle to really do for our people what we need to be done, and so that we can get to a place of liberation when and we know that it's not going to happen, you know, maybe we might not see exactly what we want right in this generation, but that they're going to be working toward that in their generation, and so on and so forth.
no doubt. Yeah. Thank you for that, because it's very necessary work. So appreciate that. Talk to me about Northeast Political Prisoner Coalition, right? That's a organization that you work with, right? You talk to them a little bit about the work that's being done.
Yeah, so I've been working with the Northeast Political Prisoners Coalition for, I want to say, almost 10 years now.
Mm.
And it was founded by Sekou Odinga
Mm.
when he got out of prison after doing 33 years. And so he started the organization so that we can get more of the Black Panther Party and Black Liberation Army members out of prison.
Mm-hmm.
And so that you know, has been our particular focus, to get those, because what I found in, you know, looking at political prisoners within the United States is that a lot of the Black political prisoners, it reflects, you know, the way that they're treated, the way that, you know, that they're held in confinement for so long, and the way that they're tortured within the prison walls is in line with the same way that Black people are treated, as opposed to how other people are treated within the United States. And so their treatment mirrors just, you know, the settler colonial states organization and treatment of African people in general. And that includes, you know, them being the ones that other people will get out, like white people will get out before them, you know, Puerto Rican people may get out before them, but that they're going to have the hardest time being released. And so so that's what we do. We work to help get them out of prison in multiple ways, whether it's through raising money just to help within while they're in prison, if they need it for commissary, but also for legal fees, for getting lawyers, for filing documents, to helping their families go and visit them, to helping see what families need. So we raise money for that. We also raise awareness to get the community more involved, so that when it's time for them to go for parole, we're having different campaigns, whether it's a clemency campaign or a parole campaign or a medical clemency campaign or something like that, You're always going to need letters of support. You're always going to need character letters. You're always going to need people from the community saying, like, I know who this person is. I like this. We want them back in the community, because those are things that they'll use to say, like, oh, well, this person, they can't be released because they're a danger to society, or this person can't be released. Look, the community don't want them, and so it's important, that kind of support, but also to get people to even know about them, because just like
Yes.
our history is silenced, they want to also silence our history through making sure we don't know about these people who are political
Yep.
prisoners, who are, Black Panther Party members, BLA members, who fought for our liberation, who created programs, educational programs, like when we're talking about the Black Panthers and the 10-point program and the free breakfast program and the education program that they had. Um,
Yeah.
the defense of our communities against police brutality, the fight to, make sure that we get equal treatment when we do go to prison. I mean, when we do interact with the court system. So all of those things that, just the basic necessities that every human being should have, right? That we have to fight,
Hmm.
die for. And the lives of so many of our freedom fighters have been taken, whether it's been um, physically, like through assassinations, like when we think about the assassination of Fred Hampton Jr. and Field Marshal Mark Clark.
No
Yeah.
doubt.
So, or, through putting them in prison, having them die behind the wall, where, they have there's so many of them who've been medically neglected, that have so many ailments. They're aging. You have people who, like Jalil Mutakim, who was put in prison when he was 19 and he didn't get out until he was 68, spent 50 years in prison. You have Veronza Bowers, who was just recently released, who spent 51 years in prison. You have those who are still in prison, like Imam Jamil Al-Amin. You also have Joy Powell, who is also imprisoned. You have Jojo Bowman, who's still in prison, Ronald Reed. Um, you just have, like, so there's so many that are still behind the wall. We've been able to get, some of them out. Some of them have transitioned behind the wall. And so the struggle just continues.
No
And
doubt.
that's the work that we do to really make sure that we're raising awareness, we're raising funds, we're supporting them, we're writing to them, we're letting people know about them, we're educating around them, and we're also educating ourselves, and
Word.
teaching our youth that, we have to fight for our freedom fighters. Like, what nation, you know, turns its back on its soldiers that have put their lives on the line? So when we think about veterans and all that other stuff, like, no, we have veterans of the Black Panther Party. Like,
Yeah,
we
those
have
are
our
our
own,
veterans. Yeah.
yeah, we have our own veterans that are fighting for us.
Word. And unfortunately, Babylon, this nasty system is doing a good job at that, at hiding our political prisoners, and also our movements, because truth is, we know because we're activists, we're organizers, but a lot of people are out here thinking that there's nothing going on. I hear a lot of people speaking sometimes, like, yeah, back in the day. I'm like, struggle is still going on. There's a bunch of organizations out here. People are like, a lot of people think there's nothing going on. Like you said, they don't even know of our political prisoners. You know what I'm saying? So because the system makes an effort to not highlight these things and to hide these things,
Yep.
whether it is in real life, through media, through algorithms, all of this shit, So it's important for us that know and that are in the work, in the movement, to definitely highlight our political prisoners, because they've done the work and we wouldn't be here without them. You know what I'm saying? The same way we need to always teach, like you said, teaching the youth about them, about our ancestors, about our political prisoners, etc. We're nothing without them. So,
Yep.
I appreciate
Exactly.
the work y'all doing with that. All right, so I can't let you go, without asking you about veganism. You know what I'm saying? My vegan comrade from the Rise Up, you know what I'm saying? So talk to me a little bit about that. I want to know. I want to know, when did you go vegan? why are you vegan? Because different people are vegan for different reasons, and just what's your reasoning, when it comes to veganism. Because I
Yeah.
think because I think it's an important subject, you know what I'm saying, that we don't talk about enough.
I definitely think it is an important subject. And I actually did watch a video um interview with the sister who was talking about veganism, and I thought it was really insightful for me.
Appreciate.
I've always been somebody who thinks about making sure that I'm doing right by myself, right? And that I'm paying attention to um who's trying not to do right by me. And it's part of the reason why I became a social studies teacher, because when I was learning and I got interested in history and social studies, because I started realizing like, oh, these are the people who are in the government. They're just the a regular person that decided to run, and now they're the ones saying like, oh, we could do this or we can't do this, like, making all these policies. So just like them, if any one of us wants to be in that position, we can change things because we can, get into that position and blah 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 blah.
Mm.
Well, and obviously we know it's a little bit more, it's not as
Yeah.
simple as that like the way I saw it. But so I've always been thinking about, positions of power and how that impacts people on an individual level. And so when I was in college, I was taking a health course. It was not a health course, sorry, an environmental course. So I had to take
Okay.
an environmental studies course. And so when I was taking that environmental studies course, I just started learning about like the whole process of what they're doing to the animals, how they're harming the environment through, the way that they're grazing the animals, the way that they're caging chickens and using all these antibiotics and, polluting the water through their practices and um, all of that. So I was just like, and then we were also, and during that course, we watched the movie, and this was years ago, because I've been and not eating meat in general for at least 20 years, I would say, for about 20 years.
That's dope.
Yeah, and it started in college and we watched this so that was like 20 years ago basically. I watched the film Food Inc. in that environmental science class as one
Okay.
of the things that we did. And in the movie, in that film, so we were already learning about what's being done, whatever, to the environment and how it's being harmed. And I've always been very connected to like nature and the environment and just love being, outside and seeing what my connection is to it and everything. And they were showing also like how in the grocery store everything has corn in it, how they use all these monocrops, and they've for the purpose of the bottom line and making sure that they have the profits, that they take corn and they make it all these things. It's in everything that you would never think of. It's in ketchup, it's in rice. I mean, it's in a hamburger helper meal, or it's in like all of these things that you would be like, what, corn is in that? That's crazy. And so I saw how like our food was being made and how all of our food was very unhealthy for us,
Mm.
just so somebody else can make money, and that they really don't give two shits about us, and
Mm.
for lack of a better word, like they really don't care. So if you want to make sure that you're healthy and that you're not ending up in a bad position, or that you're not getting diseases, you have to be in control of your own health, and you have to be vigilant. You can't just think that, oh yeah, the food, I can trust the food in the grocery store, I can trust that they're doing right by it. No, because you can't. So for me, it was kind of like lifting the veil of, secrecy over the food industry. And also around that same time, I was working with someone who had been a vegan for a very long time, like an older woman that I knew, that, whose daughter would go to I was working at a daycare, like over the summers or whatever. And so her mother would sometimes work there part-time, and she would, so we would have conversations about, vegan, vegetarianism in particular,
Yeah.
and what that was like. And then that, so it was I think that's kind of almost how things usually go with me, that there's there's multiple things happening in my life that lead me to so there's the course that I was taking, learning all this stuff. I'm talking to this woman about being, because I'm just interested. I want
Yeah.
know. And I was like, and I was thinking, oh, that sounds whatever. And then, I get more of the information through my class, and I'm just like, oh yeah. So it's seeming more like something I want to go toward. And then, but it's the idea of like, okay, well, if I stop eating meat, like what do I do? How do I do it?
Yeah.
And then I ended up going to California that year. And I was at UCLA. I was staying on the UCLA campus, and we were eat, that's where we ate all the time. And so every meal there was always these vegetarian options. And I was like, oh wow, okay, so this is how it's possible. So then when I got back home, I told my siblings, like, okay, next week I'm going to be vegetarian. I'm going vegetarian next week. And like my sisters, my two older sisters, they're like, oh yeah, well, we're gonna go vegetarian too. And so we all went vegetarian the next week together. And like I haven't looked back since. So I was a vegetarian first for I want to say maybe like 10 years. And then I became vegan after. Yeah, because then I started learning more about the cheese and the mucus, because I still ate cheese. And I love mozzarella sticks, and so like that was a whole thing. And so
and then also like when you start noticing that the animal abuse is also present, when it comes to milk and cheese, right? You know what I'm saying? And it still affects also the planet as well, because the whole industry is kind of really similar, even eggs and all of that, you know what I'm saying? So
yeah, exactly. And so just learning more and more. And over my time, I've just been learning more and more about food and our body and food ways and food practices. So yeah.
So how was that? Because I know, like you said, I went vegan also close to 10 years ago, and then my stuff was gradual. So, so I first stopped eating pork, then I stopped eating red meat, then you know what I'm saying? So I probably, it's been a while, but 20 years ago, I'm sure 20 years ago when you wasn't eating meat, they was looking at you like you was crazy.
Yeah,
Like,
my friends especially.
yeah. So how was that? I know people was like, because even 10 years ago, like I'm like, yeah, I don't eat meat. Like, how do you do it? Are you all right? Are you sick? How you
Exactly.
feeling?
Yeah.
You know what I'm
Oh
saying?
yeah. It's crazy because it's crazy to think that I was vegan. I went vegetarian when there was none of these substitutes. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
so it's crazy to think, because it feels like these things have been around for so long, and I'm not even like, I'm not an older person in a sense, right? So it's
Yeah.
just like, just to think that like, wow, okay, yeah, when I went vegetarian, there was none of these things around. And
You
so
actually had to
look
cook
at,
beans and lentils and
yeah, exactly.
garbanzos and eat
People did look at me crazy,
almonds and seeds.
especially my friends. I remember my friends were like, so you're saying you don't eat meat anymore, but this, because it was I think before I went to California, we had went on a trip, because when I came back is when they when I came back to school that fall is when they they were like, oh okay, she's like, but you were this summer you were just eating chicken. And I was like, yeah, I know, but I'm not eating.
Yeah. I changed.
and
I,
my and
I
my
still
friend,
have one of my boys. He always talks to me about like how we used to eat chicken together. I'm like, yeah, man, I know we used to eat chicken, brother.
exactly,
That
they're
was over
like,
10 years ago, my man.
exactly, they're like, but you were eating it. Yeah, I was, but I'm not eating it anymore. Like, it's not happening anymore.
Right.
Um, so yeah, and then my family, because I come from a ICN, an ICN background,
Yeah.
that there's a lot of meat in,
Mm.
in our dishes. And sometimes, meat in dishes that doesn't even need there, where we don't need to have it in there, but that's a whole nother story. And so like they at first too were like, what do you mean you don't eat meat? So so what are you gonna eat? Because a lot of the eating is rice and chicken, or rice and griot, or rice and fish, like
Yeah.
it's a lot of it is paired with meat. You'll have 4 different types of meats, a rice or 2 different kinds of rice, and a little salad off on the side, maybe a beet salad too. And so yeah, they were also confused.
Yeah,
They
no
were more
doubt.
confused. Yeah, they did like um they just didn't understand it. They just confused, like that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
We're
But
just
I
like,
mean, yeah, that's how it is. But like, same with me. Like when in Cuba, they also eat a lot of meat. And like when I would go back for a little while, anytime we don't live in Cuba, when family comes back to Cuba, like I said, my father is from a small town in Matanzas, like, outside of the city, right? So we would go out there with my brothers or whatever, and they'd be like, yo, like, you guys are here, we about to kill an animal for y'all so we can eat
Yeah.
good. You
Yeah.
know what I'm saying? So we'd be like, yo, listen. And then so you feel like you disrespected the family, so it's kind of tough. But you try to let them know at first they would not understand, like, yo, what do you
Yeah.
mean? But then with time, they started understanding, and then they were like, okay, but there's still like I still to this day when I go back home, I gotta make sure I check. Like if there's beans, I gotta go to the kitchen, make sure see what's going on because they'll be like, oh yeah, just take the meat out. I'm like,
Yeah.
doesn't work like that. If you
Exactly.
cook meat in the pot of beans, I'm straight. I'm good. I appreciate it, but
Yeah, they have yeah, over the years because it's been so long that they've gotten used to it.
yeah,
And they'll say like, "Oh, we made you this because we know you don't eat meat," and so they've gotten good with that over the years just
yeah,
because yeah, now they know.
no
And they'll
doubt. Yeah, yeah,
I
same.
think sometimes they'll say be like, I think I heard one time when I went to like a family function like, "Oh yeah, them yeah, they don't eat any meat." Like, you know how they like you're those people
Yeah, that.
that are
No doubt. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But yeah, thank you for sharing. Do you have any book recommendation? A good book that you'd like to recommend? The listeners. It could be something on, what we spoke about earlier, Haiti or anything, veganism, doesn't have to be whatever you want. Just a good book.
so I guess I'm gonna go with three books
No
that I
doubt.
think is really good. I would definitely recommend, and these are books that people probably know and some that they don't. Irritated Genie by Jacob Carruthers. It's about the Haitian Revolution.
Hmm.
Um, Also, I would recommend the book The Miseducation of the Negro by Carter G. Woodson. And I would also recommend this other book. It's a little hard to get. So if you can get it used, that would be great. But if you can't, because it's out of print, but it's a really good book. So that one is a fiction book, but it's really good and it really touches upon a lot of the stuff that we were talking about and thinking about as far as Pan-Africanism, resistance, and all of that.
Nice. All right, all right. Thank you. Appreciate that. Book recommendation. I'm gonna have that down in the description. And before you go, Natasha, can you please let everybody know, the socials, anything you want to plug, that you got going on, whatever, whatever. Let the listeners know. I'm gonna have some links down in the description as well.
So yeah, so you can catch me on social media on Instagram as Natacha NATACHA_X. And where else? I mean, I guess like in terms of the work that I do, you can find me on LinkedIn, and you can message me there if anything. You could also message me on Instagram. I mean, I'm not the best at always checking messages, whatever, but from time to time I do that too. And you can catch me on Facebook as well, but I don't really do much. I here I am. I'm like, catch me on this, but I don't really
But
do
I'm not
but
there.
I'm not really because the reason I was saying catch me on Facebook is because actually I'm thinking about starting um a group for like a Facebook group for Black educators who want to
Okay.
really have a community where they can help each other navigate the public school spaces if they're in them, even if they're not in public school spaces, if they're parents or whatever, but help each other think about and develop curriculum lessons, ideas around teaching our children the truth and in our history and stuff like that.
Mhm. No doubt. That's
Yeah.
dope for sure. You heard it here first on the Vital Hoops podcast. You got Natacha Robert. I appreciate you, comrade. Thank you for all the work that you do. You know what I'm saying? I appreciate, rocking with you on the Rise Up as well, on the Rise Up morning show. And
Same.
yeah, you know what I mean? We gonna win by any means necessary.
That
Yep.
what I think there's a there's a saying that says we're gonna win despite of ourselves.
That's right. That's right.
So
Koupe
we
tet
yeah,
boule.
we're gonna win. Exactly. We're gonna win no matter what. But thank you, Fernando, for having me on. I hope I provided, as much insight as I could.
You definitely did. You definitely did. I appreciate you.
Yeah.
So y'all heard that. I hope everybody get down there, hit us up with a couple comments, let us know what you thought. And catch Natacha, follow her on IG, and check us out on the Rise Up.
Yep,
Thank you.
that's right.
Thank you, comrade.
Thank you.
Peace.
Peace.
All right, episode 68 is in the books. Thank you for checking out the Bottle Hoops podcast. Please support however you can, whether it's through PayPal, through Patreon, or just, sharing, liking, sharing, leaving a comment. I appreciate it. All the links are down in the description. Make sure you follow Natacha on IG. Check out what she got going on. And if you're not up on the Rise Up International Morning Show, make sure you check us out. The link is down in the description as well. Also, we spoke a little bit about veganism towards the end there with Natacha. But let me let y'all know, for those of you who understand French, with my organization, the Pan-African League Umoja, we just had a deep conversation with a comrade of mine and a great guest about health and wellness, the 10th element of hip hop. So I'm going to leave the link to that down in the description as well. You're welcome to check it out. Leave a comment if you understand French, or if you want to learn French as well. Check it out. Vital Hoops is for the people, by the people, for the culture. Uhuru.